What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Action Network podcast presented by FanDuel. I am your host, Chris Raybon, and today's episode is our NFL draft grades for the AFC, where we will go through every team in the conference, evaluate their draft selections, and hand out a letter grade at the end. And to do that, I'll be getting the help of our old friend, our compadre, our brother from another here at the pod, Matthew Friedman, the director of content at Fantasy Pros, Matt F. the Oracle on Twitter. Matt, good to see you, man. What's going on?
Yeah, good to see you. Shout out Matt Mitchell for bringing me back to the show. It's always good to reconnect with the old friends here at Action. It's better collective now, but yeah, it's good to be on the show here talking with you.
Awesome. Yeah, man. So I know you're a big, you really like to get into the draft. I remember during the pandemic, we kind of, that content kind of carried us through, man. We were talking draft every day. Yeah. So I know you're going to have thoughts. So we're going to get right into it. We're going to go division by division here. And let's start with the AFC East. And I'm going to start with probably the most newsworthy team of the AFC East, and that's the New York Jets. We know they acquired Aaron Rodgers. And let me ask you this before we get into them. When you have a team like the Jets, or, maybe the Broncos, who made these big acquisitions that also involve draft picks, do you kind of factor that into your grades?
Yeah, I'm thinking of Aaron Rodgers as being, kind of quote unquote, a part of this draft class. So okay, that factors into it. I have them as a B plus, solid B plus, part of it is that I think they really kind of screwed themselves by allowing the Packers to fleece them with the 15-13 swap. And that ended up being significant because they really wanted a tackle to be able to protect, your 40-year-old, maybe 41-year-old quarterback at this point in Aaron Rodgers. And Broderick Jones was no longer available there, the left tackle they were targeting. And so I would say that they kind of panicked a little bit, and they took Will McDonald, who is a totally fine player, edge rusher, someone who can help their defense. But it felt like they took him a little bit too early. They came back strong in the second round with Joe Tippmann as center, who can, plug in right away as a starter. Israel Ebekananda, they were pretty strong in getting him. I think he was like a quality player in the fifth round as a running back out of Pitt. And then I would say like one of the steals of the draft, Old Dominion tight end Zach Kuntz. They got him in the seventh round, and this dude was like athleticism, so important at the tight end position, like all world athleticism, like the most athletic tight end out of like the past 20 years. And this is like coming from the class that's maybe like the best tight end class that we've seen entering the NFL. So, I would say, what they did in the first round was suboptimal, but what they did after that was pretty good. And getting, Aaron Rodgers as the guy who could potentially catapult them into the playoffs and maybe contention for a Super Bowl, that's pretty strong. So, B plus, I feel like kind of like splitting the difference there between screwing up in the first round, but getting Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback.
Yeah, I'm a little bit down on the Jets, the way they went about it, only because I do think that, as you mentioned, not getting the tackle and combining that with, the 40-year-old quarterback, who, by the way, had one of his worst seasons last year. Like, I think that actually knocks them a little more for me because, it's kind of, you kind of have to take it together. Like, there's no synergy now with your acquisition and what you did in the draft as much. So yeah, they're probably more like a B minus, C plus to me, but let's go to Buffalo here, because Buffalo, they started out with, I know us that are into fantasy are kind of interested in this. They go tight end Dalton Kincaid in the first round. What'd you think of that, and what's your grade for them?
It was a weird move. I'm giving them a B. Dalton Kincaid, really athletic tight end, more of a big-bodied slot receiver versus a true inline tight end, and he can challenge vertically through the slot. And so that is something that I think is going to give the Bills more playmaking ability, but at the same time, he is a tight end. We have seen players at that position, I wouldn't say struggle, but take more time to transition into the league than we would if it's a wide receiver or a running back or, other skill positions. So, I'm a little bit uncertain about that. Also, they just signed Dawson Knox to a contract. So, it wasn't like a position of need. I don't think they actually needed another playmaking tight end. But, that said, If they go more of a 2 tight end set, maybe that gives them a little more muscle in the running game, and they still have 2 playmakers at the tight end position. So maybe that challenges defenses in ways that are kind of harder to address. And then Osiris Torrance, the guard that they picked up in the second round, like that was a great pick. He conceivably could have gone near the bottom of the first round, and that guy is a powerful, just run blocking machine. And so I think that was a great pick. After that, it's a little bit of whatever, nothing really special with what they did. But, Kincaid is a playmaker, and Torrance was a really strong pick in the second round. So I'm giving them like a solid B. I don't think the Kincaid integration into the offense is going to go as smoothly as they might think, but he's still a playmaker.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think ideally Buffalo in a better wide receiver class might have gone receiver with that pick for Kincaid. But if you look kind of just at who they drafted top to bottom, they really did go about filling needs. I mean, it was tight end, it was wide receiver, it was linebacker, and it was, interior line. So they did a good job of that. It's just the guys got to pan out. So we'll see how that goes. Then we got the Miami Dolphins. This team is, they're coming off a playoff burst. So they're trying to compete in this suddenly loaded AFC East. They didn't have many picks, so they start in the second round with corner Cam Smith out of South Carolina. What did you think of their draft with the 4 picks only throughout the 7 rounds?
Yeah, I mean, they had no picks. I mean, part of their first round class is not having Tom Brady,
Right.
like that. So, that they get dinged for that. They traded a pick away for Bradley Chubb, traded picks for Tyreek Hill, traded a pick for Jeff Wilson, and traded a pick for Jalen Ramsey, So all of those guys are kind of taken into account here a little bit. The Cam Smith pick, I wouldn't say he was a borderline round 1, round 2 guy, but he had gotten a little bit of round 1 discussion. So getting him, near the end of round 2, there's certainly some value there. And then Devon Achane out of Texas A&M, the running back they drafted in the 3rd round. I love that pick. Like they're just building speed on speed in that offense. And like that dude is legit track star, but he's also got like some football to him. Like he's not just a guy who can run really fast that they put in the backfield. Like he can play a little bit dirty, like in the way that he attacks linebackers when he's running at them. Like I actually like his game a little bit. In like a best of world scenario, he turns into Chris Johnson. Now, like that's not likely to happen, right? But like he's more than just a dude who can run really fast, but he can also run really fast. Like Tyreek Hill, like adjacent type of speed. So him as a guy that maybe he's not getting, like 15 touches a game, but even if he's just getting like 5 carries a game and 4 targets a game, like that could be enough within the flow of that offense. So I like that a lot. So, giving them a B- here. They don't have many picks, but I feel like with the 2 top picks they did have, they actually maximized them.
Yeah, and I think once you factor in, Ramsey, Chubb, like the fact that those guys, picks were used on those guys, I do think there's some upside to this team this year. Obviously a lot is going to depend on, whether Tua is able to stay healthy, but like, I don't actually put this draft. I know people are going to look at the picks and say they're only 4. I don't put this draft as far behind a team like the Jets as some people, because I think, a lot of it is just how the roster came together. And I see a high upside defense and I see a high upside offense, when it's all said and done. And, you talk about, the back in the 3rd round, and that could be another upside pick. So yeah, I'm not too down on Miami myself. Let's talk New England here. New England, they're suddenly looking at potentially being in the cellar of this division. They start out with cornerback Christian Gonzalez out of Oregon with the 17th overall pick. What do you think of the Patriots?
Yeah, so the first 2 picks were really intriguing. Christian Gonzalez, that was a fantastic steal that they got. Like there were some scenarios in which he could have gone, as high as like number 6 or something like that. Certainly could have gone like, number 12, 13. He ends up falling to them to 17 with them trading back and accumulating more draft capital. So Fantastic pick there and addresses a big need. And then their second pick, Keon White, defensive lineman out of Georgia Tech, who's got some inside outside versatility. He could have gone in round one. He was actually invited to the draft. So it was one of those guys in the green room who didn't go on day one. And when they drafted him, you could tell he was pissed, like he just looked like a guy who's going to take it out on the rest of the league. So I thought they got great value in those two. And then they had 10 picks after that, where they just did like typical Patriots things where it's like, all right, you drafted that guy a round and a half higher than you needed to. Congratulations. You just traded up for a kicker. What are you doing? Why are you taking a punter in the 6th round? Like Bill Belichick knows more football than I do, clearly. But I will say, just in terms of like value, what they did starting in the 3rd round on, they were not addressing the draft board that everyone else was looking at. So I'm giving them a C+ there. They, for the picks that mean the most, they did well. After that, it was pretty underwhelming.
Yeah, it seemed like they were kind of drafting to fill the roster and drafting for need. And maybe, when you have a lot of picks, maybe that's just the philosophy. But yeah, it's going to depend on those top picks hitting. At least they didn't take a wide receiver in round 1 or something like that, because then we would have been reason for concern in Foxborough yet again. But let's jump to the AFC North. And I know that you really liked the Cincinnati Bengals draft.
Yeah, giving them an A. This was a beautiful draft. They let the board fall to them. They took Miles Murphy in the 1st round, the Clemson edge. And you wouldn't say like edge was a big need for them, but at the same time, it's, almost impossible to have too many strong pass rushers. And when a guy of that caliber falls down the board to you, you take him. And then DJ Turner, the Michigan cornerback, they took him in the 2nd round. This dude is freaky at the cornerback position, 6'3", the longest arms out of any cornerback ever recorded at the combine. Fantastic athletic profile. I think he fits in really well. And then in the 3rd round, they took Alabama safety Jordan Battle, 4-year starter in the SEC. He plugs in right away. In the 4th round, Purdue wide receiver Charlie Jones, who eventually can maybe take over for Tyler Boyd. He can serve as a kick returner. In the 5th round, Illinois running back Chase Brown, who's big, fast, can catch the ball. So he fits in like perfect complement or backup to Joe Mixon there. And then in the 6th round, Princeton wide receiver Andre Iasovis, who was just like a spark score masterpiece. And coming from Princeton, probably not going to make a real impact, but he's got significant upside, and he could be like an ace special teamer right away. So it was just nailed this draft. The Cincinnati Bengals, really impressed with what they did.
Yeah, it seemed like they had a perfect kind of combination of filling needs, but actually playing the board. And especially, when you're drafting, was it 25th? I think that's impressive. So like the Bengals draft as well. And I know another team that you liked perhaps even more than the Cincinnati Bengals was a team I kind of like coming into the draft too. I thought their squad would look a lot better after the draft. And it seems like you agree, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, A+ for them. And the difference between like an A+, Broderick Jones, they jumped over the Jets, like magnificent timing of the draft and just kind of all around awareness of how the board was falling, because they had 2 needs entering the draft: offensive tackle and cornerback, the clear 2 top needs. And they could see, okay, this is the place where we should move up, go get the offensive tackle, because cornerbacks are falling down the board a little bit. We saw with Christian Gonzalez falling down to the Patriots at 17. They could see cornerbacks were starting to fall. So they jumped up ahead of the Jets, who had number 15. They jumped up to 14, took Broderick Jones, who slots in right away as a left tackle. Now they're solidified along the offensive line. And then with their 2nd pick, number 32, getting Joey Porter Jr., the cornerback and legacy, right? From Penn State there, getting him to fill the other big need that they had at cornerback. Fantastic drafting there. And then in the 3rd round, getting Georgia tight end Darnell Washington, who is like a Martellus Bennett type, like big guy, fantastic athleticism. He probably never will turn into like a true number 1 tight end, but that guy's going to be a monster as a supplemental number 2 tight end who can, I think, stretch the seam because he's so athletic, but then also just be a monster as a blocker. So fantastic draft for them, and the way they moved around to get these players. I mean, other guys I'm not mentioning, but man, I loved what the Steelers were doing.
Yeah, I did as well. I think the only thing I'm missing from the Steelers is I like to see them take a wide receiver in day 2 or day 3, just because they've been so good at kind of picking out guys further down the board at that position. And I thought signing or acquiring Allen Robinson, I don't think that's really the answer. I know they still got Austin from a year ago, who've never seen play in this league yet, but I thought that was the only thing that was a little disappointing. But overall, yeah, great draft for the Steelers. And this is going to be an extremely competitive division, as we know, because Baltimore gets their QB in Lamar Jackson, and then they already have OBJ, who we'll see how much he can give them. But they start the first round and they go get a wide receiver for Lamar. What did you think of the Baltimore Ravens?
Yeah, the Ravens, I'm giving them a solid B here. In the first round, they went and got Zay Flowers, who I think is going to slot in pretty nicely with the wide receivers they have there. And, I will say, even though maybe it, like at first glance, doesn't seem like they needed a wide receiver, you have Mark Andrews as a really strong pass catching tight end. And then you signed Odell Beckham Jr. and you have Rashad Bateman, a first rounder from a few years ago, who's returning. Isaiah Likely is a really strong number 2. And then Nelson Aguilar as a decent complementary receiver that you brought in through free agency. You might look at that and say, like, we don't need one, but Zay Flowers, I love the draft pick because he can play inside, he can play outside. He's smaller, but he doesn't play small, and he's got good athleticism for his size. And I mean, I'm not going to trust Odell Beckham Jr. and Rashad Bateman as the top 2 wide receivers in that offense. I think Zay Flowers could actually be the number 1 wide receiver for them this year. And so I think, it's important to get a guy like that for their new quarterback, playing in that, that air raid offense with new offensive coordinator Todd Monken. And then, they address the defensive side of the ball, replacing Roquan Smith, or actually, sorry, supplementing Roquan Smith with linebacker Trenton Simpson, who, could have, I won't say he could have been a first rounder, but he was kind of in that mix of like off ball linebackers who might be able to sneak into round 1. And so to get someone like that in round 3, I think provided really good value. And then the last guy that they drafted, 7th rounder, offensive guard Andrew Voorhees from USC. He tore, I think, his ACL at the combine. And so like he's kind of red shirting for this year, but if not for that, like he could have been a top 100 pick. So I think getting a value like that in the 7th round, letting him sit for a year, and then knowing that you can kind of plug him into your offensive line the next year, I think that's pretty good value there.
Yeah, I think Baltimore, another team that, working with somewhat limited resources, did a pretty good job of filling all their needs. And I'll say this, I don't think anybody that's a Baltimore Ravens fan would ever at first glance look at this team and say they don't need a wide receiver. I think if they drafted a wide receiver in the first round for the next 5 years, I don't think anybody in Baltimore would be too mad after what they've been through these last few years at that position. The Cleveland Browns, this was a team that you were not so high on coming out of the draft. Their first pick is wide receiver Cedric Tillman, but that's not until the 3rd round. What do you think of the Browns?
Yeah, I gave them a C. And so part of it is, Deshaun Watson. He is included in this class. So they traded away a first rounder, traded away a 2nd rounder, gave him a massive contract, entirely guaranteed. And last year, he massively underwhelmed. Now, let's assume that he's going to be significantly better this year, but still, not having those draft picks and having that massive contract dedicated towards him guaranteed, that knocks it down a little bit for me. But with the players they did bring in, I actually do like these guys quite a bit. Cedric Tillman, wide receiver out of Tennessee, big bodied guy with decent athleticism who is productive. I think he could compete to be a starting wide receiver for them. Siaki Ika, Baylor defensive tackle, like big bodied run stuffer. And then DeJuan Jones, offensive tackle out of Ohio State. There are some concerns about him just in terms of, like work ethic and stuff like that. Like, is he going to be able to maintain his weight? But man, getting him in the 4th round, like that is a significant value pick right there, because he could actually come in and be a starter. So I like the guys that they got. It's just that, man, like those are guys that you're getting in the 3rd and 4th round. And Deshaun Watson is, a little uncertain as the face of your franchise.
All right, let's jump to the AFC South, which, I think on a yearly basis seems seems like it was the Colts and Titans, and then now the Jaguars are kind of at the head of that division. But the team that really stood out to you was the Indianapolis Colts. And I personally, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, but I know Anthony Richardson's far from a finished product. I know all the downsides to him, but I just thought after Bryce Young in this quarterback class, I think you kind of want to take a chance here, because I don't think anyone was a sure thing outside of Young. So I'm curious to what you thought of the Richardson pick, and then what you thought of the Colts draft as a whole.
Yeah, so for at least a month, there was the Will Levis to the Colts smoke. And I would say that the Colts, I'm giving them an A+ for a few reasons, one of which is that they sidestepped that landmine and went with Anthony Richardson, who, as you say, like, the upside is tremendous. Like, this is the most athletic. I mean, maybe Michael Vick, right? But like, setting aside that, like, we have never seen a guy at the quarterback position who is this big, who is also this fast, right? Like, who combines that size and the speed. And he's got the youth. He's just 21 years old. And so there's room for the maturation and the upside with him. And so putting him with a guy who helped develop Jalen Hurts, I absolutely love that. And then in the second round, Kansas State cornerback Julius Brents, he slots in as an immediate starter. He's got great length. North Carolina wide receiver Josh Downs. Like, I don't want to compare him to T.Y. Hilton, because for me, that's like a sacred comparison. I love T.Y. Hilton, but like, he can step in immediately and be a very strong receiver out of the slot. BYU offensive tackle Blake Freeland, like, very strong swing tackle who actually might have the capability of slotting in at right tackle. And then they can move their current right tackle into the interior, which actually just strengthens the entirety of the offensive line. And then for them, the big steal, Northwestern defensive tackle Tomi Adebaware, who's got like great capability, just a physical freak with how big he is and how fast he is. And then he's got some flexibility. He can, maybe he's an edge, maybe he's a defensive tackle. Like, he's kind of this tweener, which, like, I think is why he fell in the draft. But, if you've got a good defensive coach, maybe they figure out like a creative way of how to use him. Getting him in the 4th round is significant value. And then they added like 8 other picks after that. A couple of those guys I think will be good depth. So absolutely love what they did, starting at the top with Anthony Richardson and then going all the way down through the draft. So A+ for the Indianapolis Colts.
Yeah, the Colts, they've been kind of sitting there in NFL purgatory for a while now, and it finally bottomed out last year. And I didn't know how exactly it was going to go, but I really do like them coming out of the draft, because I think they did exactly what they needed to do. They addressed needs, but they also took shots on upside. And in this kind of division, it's not going to take probably more than 9-10 games necessarily to win this division. So I think they improved their defense. I think they have a shot at quarterback now. And I like the Downs pick as well. So like what the Colts did. What about the Titans? You like them not as much as the Colts, but more than any other team in this division?
Yeah, the draft for this entire division felt a little bit mediocre. The Titans, I'm giving them a B. Will Levis, they were able to get him in the 2nd round. So I think that's significant value there. They could have taken him in the first at number 11, and I don't think anyone would have blinked. But Will Levis just did not feel like the kind of quarterback who really should go that high in the draft. But I think he probably should have been a 1st rounder, like somewhere in the 20s. Getting him at number 33, I think there's some value there. And then at number 11, taking Peter Skoronski, who I think is the best, just kind of raw, just general offensive lineman in this draft. There are questions about whether he's a tackle. The arm length maybe means that he needs to kick into guard, but I think that dude could be a really strong offensive tackle in the NFL. And if not, then fine, you move him inside and he, could be like a Zach Martin type of offensive guard. So I like what they did there, but after that, there really wasn't all that much that's encouraging. But, hey, I think you did well with your first 2 picks. That's deserving of a B. And I think Will Levis, even though he's a 2nd rounder, I think he's going to start at some point. You look at the history of guys taken in the 2nd round, like going even back to like Andy Dalton, Jimmy Garoppolo, Derek Carr, Jalen Hurts, right? One of the most recent examples. Guys taken in the 2nd round, at some point they get their chance to start. And I think Will Levis is going to be starting sooner than later. So getting a quarterback who has starting potential for you in the 2nd round, I think there's value there. So B for the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, this was a pretty risky draft for them. I think this is going to be one of the ones where, we're going to have to go back and reevaluate this at some point, because the one thing they did was they pretty much they did completely ignore defense in this draft. Every player they took was an offensive player. And, listen, they've been great at finding guys, even when their defensive guys get hurt, they've been great at finding guys on the practice squad to fill holes. Their defense always overperforms. I think that's, something to do with Mike Vrabel as well. So they kind of said, hey, we're going to kind of lean on that, and we're going to improve the side of the ball that does need improvement. And that has been the reason that they've been held back. Because I remember they played the Chiefs toe to toe with Malik Willis starting at quarterback one of those weeks last year. So defense really is never the problem, but it's still a very interesting kind of strategy. And a lot of it is going to depend on, can that continue? And, they got the new GM now as well. So can they keep finding guys to, throw in there from the practice squad and things like that? So I think it's one of them that this is an incomplete for me for Tennessee, but you got to take some chances, and they certainly had an interesting philosophy here. So we'll see how that pans out. The Jaguars, what'd you think of them? They kind of come in here with, for once they got to defend the division crown here. They're not picking until 28th, and they go Anton Harrison out of Oklahoma at offensive tackle. What'd you think of Jacksonville?
Yeah, C+. So Cam Robinson, he has a PED suspension, and then they lost right tackle Jawan Taylor in free agency. So they needed to do something along the offensive line, and they addressed it with Anton Harrison, who, earlier in the process, there were, questions about, would he be round 2? He ended up going in round 1. He kind of flew up the draft boards the closer we got to the draft. So, fine pick there. And then Penn State tight end Brenton Strange is the guy they went with in the second round. That was a little bit of a reach. And also Evan Ingram, they have him on a franchise tag, and they're in conversations to extend him. So I didn't think they really needed to address that position. And then, they had 13 picks in this draft. Yeah. All of the picks after that, a lot of them, it felt like there were a little bit of a reach here or there. And so not really impressed, but one guy that I think they did get a value on, Texas A&M safety Antonio Johnson, who potentially could have been a top 100 pick. Getting him at pick number 160, I think there was value there, but it was a little bit underwhelming. 13 picks, and I look at that, and I don't think you have really any difference makers except for Anton Harrison. So I'm giving them a C+.
Yeah, teams like this are always hard, because we do know that, over time it's been proven that, from a GM perspective, the skill in terms of making good picks, it's tough to come by. It's more about, having a bunch of shots in the draft and a bunch of swings. And the Jaguars had that. And I feel like we're seeing more and more teams that have a bunch of swings kind of go after their guys, which I think, the original analytics behind it was, okay, you have a bunch of swings and you still go kind of by the board and you take the best values. And that's how you kind of get the most draft, amass the most draft capital. But it seems like a lot of teams are just kind of going for their guys and are not as concerned with, okay, this is where I thought he was going to go, and just kind of taking their quote unquote guys in the draft. And that's what it looks like the Jaguars did. Yeah, I would have, liked to see them address the defensive side of the ball before day 3. So they got a lot of picks on that side of the ball on day 3, but we'll see if that pans out. But we'd just like to see them go defense a little earlier. And then the Houston Texans, they kind of started off the draft with a bang here. Guess it was a smokescreen. End up taking CJ Stroud at number 2 overall out of Ohio State after all at QB, and then they come right back and trade up to 3 and go get Will Anderson out of Alabama out on the edge. So what did you think of the Texans, strategy here of getting the 2 and then coming back with a 3?
D+. And I hate to say that, because I really like CJ Stroud. He always should have been the pick at number 2, unless you maybe wanted to go with Anthony Richardson. But CJ Stroud, if I were the Texans, that would have been the pick for me, and that would have been the end of it. That was not the case for the Texans. They wanted Will Anderson, right? That was the guy that they wanted. You have a new defensive coach there coming in. He wanted his guy. Will Anderson was the one that they wanted to take at number 2. And then you have ownership coming in saying, hey, we need a quarterback. And so they made this trade so that they could get Will Anderson at number 3 while taking CJ Stroud at number 2, knowing that they couldn't take Stroud at 3, because if they were to do that, then the price to trade up to number 3 would be even higher. But I mean, the other option, the third option, was just keep your pick at number 12 and
Yeah.
draft a perfectly good edge rusher there. Do that and then keep your pick next year. Like, what a novel concept. They traded away the future because they wanted to take Will Anderson, which, like, I get it. You like your guy, but man, like, your team is bad. You traded away your first rounder next year. You could be the worst team in the league this year. Like, that literally could be the number one pick that you traded away. So I think it was a horrible decision to do that. Again, even though I like Will Anderson, horrible decision to trade away your future pick. And then all of the other picks after this, I really disliked. Their center, Juice Scruggs, Penn State, they took him in the second round. He should have been a third or fourth rounder. Wide receiver, Tank Dell out of Houston. I love him, but the dude is 165 pounds. Like, he's not going to be someone who changes your franchise there. One guy I think they did get value on, linebacker out of Alabama, Henry To'oTo'o. I think he could have been a borderline top 100 pick. So getting him in the fifth round at 167, I think there's value there. But man, at the top of the board after CJ Stroud, and why go through all of that? Like, like, we're going to take a defender at number 2. Like, I think that has to sort of shake CJ Stroud's confidence. So part of it is also like the process of everything leading up to that pick. Now you're bringing in a guy, instead of him being someone who's like really triumphant as the number 2, like, no doubt pick, he had to go through the mud for a month before you take him number 2. So everything about this process was just subpar. So D+ for the Texans.
Yeah, and it kind of does scream of, okay, we need a quarterback, obviously, but then we have this defensive coach, we got to appease him, and that seemed like what was kind of pushing the trade up. And it's funny because last year, I mean, pass defense, it just wasn't their main problem. They were 14th in DVOA against the pass. They were 20th in sacks, but I mean, in sack rate, but it wasn't like this was a terrible pass defense. I do get they had issues with the run, but yeah, it was kind of a head scratcher just given how much potential draft capital they just gave up just to get Anderson. All right, let's go to the AFC West, and let's start with the Las Vegas Raiders. Post Gruden era here, Tyree Wilson is their first round pick out of Texas Tech, the defensive end at 7 overall. And then they get Michael Mayer at tight end in the second round, which I thought was some good value. But what did you think of the Raiders draft?
Yeah, B-. Nothing wrong with it. And like, the highest grade that I'm giving to any of the teams in the AFC West, they just had, I think, in general, a pretty mediocre draft across the board there. But Tyree Wilson, great value on getting him at number 7. He potentially could have gone as high as number 2, number 3. So getting him at number 7 was great. And then, yeah, you mentioned Mayer, great value in getting him at the top of the second round. He potentially could have gone in the first round, widely mocked in the first round.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think after that, that's where the draft was a little more uninspiring. You're taking Alabama defensive tackle Byron Young, probably not even the best guy named Byron Young in this draft. Like, he was expected, to go after pick 100. And then the real reach at pick 100, Cincinnati wide receiver Trey Tucker took him probably 2 rounds higher than they needed to. So, I think they did well at the top of the draft, but after that, they tailed off a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm sure Raiders fans will take it because they've had some pretty bad drafts in years past. I still think, and this is probably just more of a continuation of, I didn't love their offseason, but I still think defense has a ways to go, before it gets better for the Raiders.
Absolutely. And,
right?
and to just add on to that, I mean, they were widely expected to take a cornerback at number 7. Christian Gonzalez was on the board there. They didn't address the cornerback position until pick 104. I mean, that cornerback room is one of the worst in the NFL, and they really didn't address it. So, like, what are they going to do there?
Yeah, it's going to be another one of those years where they're going to have to win with offense. And I mean, McDaniel's offense was pretty shaky at times. So yeah, this team, I'm not too high on the Raiders, but hope they prove me wrong for Raiders fans' sake. But yeesh. And it's crazy because you're saying they're the best. They got the best grade out of the 4 in the division. So I'm curious to hear where we go from here. Let's go Kansas City next. They start off with, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name. So I'll let you take that with their first round pick out of K-State.
Yeah. So I'm giving the Chiefs a C+. They took the edge, Felix Aduke Uzoma.
Ooh, there you go.
who, that's a little bit of a reach. So the thing is, like, with all of these picks, there was just a little bit of a reach, right? They took him at the end of round 1. He was probably more like a middle of round 2 kind of guy. Their second pick, SMU wide receiver, Rashee Rice, they took him, at the end of the second round there, probably more of a third round guy. So nothing wrong with the guys that they took. They just reached a little bit. We should include in this that Kadarius Toney is part of this draft class. They traded a third rounder and a sixth rounder for him. I think significant value there. And then the third round, they took Wanya Morris, Oklahoma offensive tackle, who will probably, if he doesn't start right away at right tackle, will at least compete to start at right tackle. And so it gives them some good offensive line depth. So like nothing like wrong, nothing like catastrophic with what they did. They just reached a little bit with almost all of their picks.
Yeah, I've been a fan of what Kansas City's been doing lately in the draft, and hey, it paid off in a championship last year. But I feel like on defense, they've just, they've struggled with defense, in this whole kind of Mahomes era. And so they've kind of pivoted to just taking guys with speed and, we'll see where the chips fall. And I think that kind of benefits them when they make these deep playoff runs. And, they may not be the most experienced or the most skilled anymore on defense, but they have guys with speed and quickness, and they've been playing all year. And I think they improved down the stretch. So they kind of got some more of those guys that I think, even on day 3, that I think could end up paying dividends at some point for them. So I don't hate their class either. And it's not like they had massive needs coming up. As long as you have Mahomes, you're going to be straight. So I think the Chiefs draft class, I'll say this, I think, you mentioned it, this whole division kind of had a shaky, uninspiring draft. I think the Chiefs could actually come out, if we regrade this in 2-3 years as the team that had the best draft class.
Yeah. And so they took some guys who look good. They just reached a little bit in getting them. And to compare them this year to what they did the 2 previous years, where I thought they had great drafts, they took guys at positions of need who had some great athletic profiles further down the board, right? So like they let the value come to them in those drafts, and they were getting guys at value. Whereas in this draft, they were reaching more in comparison to some of your like big board consensus big board. So not really, I'm not like bashing the Chiefs, but just felt like they reached a little bit.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be a trend with a lot of the teams picking, near the end of this draft. Cause, from what I heard, there's only about 16, 17 guys with first round grades for most of these teams. So yeah, when you're picking at that end of that first round, you're probably already dipping into those second round grades. And then, as you mentioned, they get a wide receiver in round 2 that probably has a third round grade, and it kind of butterflies from there. All right. The Chargers now, what did you think of LA, the other LA team's draft? They go wide receiver in the first round. We don't know exactly what's going on with Keenan and Mike Williams going forward. I mean, they seem committed to them, but Eckler's in kind of a state of question here. So they go Quentin Johnston out of TCU at 22. What did you think of him, and what did you think of the overall draft for the Chargers?
So I'm giving them a C. And, think of the Eagles who, we talk about in the NFC pod, they went hardcore for Georgia players, basically taking as many Georgia players as they could. And the Chargers went the opposite route. They saw the championship game for college football, and they were like, you know what, let's take as many TCU players as we can. So they took, TCU wide receiver Quentin Johnston. They took his running mate in the fourth round, Darius Davis. And then they took quarterback Max Duggan in the 7th round. I mean, I don't know, like, were these guys watching the same championship game I wasn't super impressed there, but Quentin Johnston, I would have liked to have seen them get a guy who just doesn't seem quite as redundant with the wide receivers that they already have. It's like, okay, congratulations. You got another guy who's like over 6'1" and over 205 pounds. Like, find a smaller guy who has some speed. And I guess they did that with Darius Davis, but he's a 4th rounder. I mean, I don't think he's going to come in there and really be, banging for a lot of playing time there. But the good news is with Quentin Johnston, they did find a guy who will probably be able to step in right away and be a starter, and then replace Mike Williams and or Keenan Allen when one or both of those guys leave in the following year, because they are at that breaking point in their contract. So, fine on getting Quentin Johnston. And then in the second round, they got an edge rusher out of USC who, was pretty strong. I think there were some questions about where exactly does he play? Is he, more of a defensive tackle? Is he a true edge? But, they addressed needs. I just don't think they did it in the most straightforward way.
Yeah, I mean, Tui Pelotu, I think that's how you say his name. I don't think, because the Chargers, remember, their line in general, just so many injuries last year, and their run defense has been so bad that, I don't think it matters, where he plays. I think you want kind of versatile guys. So I don't mind that. But yeah, I thought the TCU connection, with three different guys was a little strange. And I still worry, but this team just seems like a very fragile team. Maybe this draft helps build their depth, but I don't know. A lot, like you said, there's some redundancies there. They go, two wide receivers. I don't know if they necessarily needed to do two wide receivers in the first 4 picks either. So yeah, I have some questions about the Chargers draft. I still think they're going to be kind of, they have a good shot at underachieving again, even though the upside with Herbert is always going to be high. That roster just seems a little fragile to me. Speaking of fragile rosters, we got the Denver Broncos, and I'm curious as to hear your thoughts on this. And we do have a couple of minutes since this is going to be the last team we talk about for the pod. So, what did you think of this team? They only have 5 picks in the draft. Of course, Sean Payton is part of it. Russell Wilson's part of it. So just give me your kind of overall overview too, not just the draft grade, but just, what do you think of this Broncos team heading into this year with just, given what's going on at the quarterback and the head coach positions, 2 of the most important for a franchise, obviously.
Yeah, I am skeptical that their new head coach, Sean Payton, despite the success that he had previously with Drew Brees, that he is going to be able to quote unquote fix Russell Wilson. I think they're different quarterbacks. And I think Russell Wilson is probably at that point in his career where there's no rehabilitation that's coming. So I'm very skeptical about that team. I imagine that I'm going to be betting against them in various markets. And in terms of the draft, D-, Russell Wilson is a part of this class. And so if I'm thinking, heavily on the Russell Wilson component of this is an F, right? But I like the players that they did bring in this year. And so that's why this is only a D- instead of an F. Marvin Mims as their second rounder, the first pick that they had, but second rounder out of Oklahoma. He was a fantastic playmaking wide receiver who I think can line up across the formation. At some point, I'm expecting, Courtland Sutton and or Jerry Jeudy is going to be gone. And I think he steps in right away and can contribute. And then linebacker Drew Sanders out of Arkansas. He was a 5-star recruit who originally went to Alabama as an edge rusher, transferred to Arkansas, and they moved him to off-ball linebacker. But, I don't want to say got Micah Parsons capability, but he is that kind of off-ball linebacker who has the size and the athleticism to where they can actually use him as an edge rusher if they want to. And, he was just a dynamic player this past year. And so getting him in the 3rd round at number 67, I think that's tremendous value. And then Iowa cornerback Riley Moss, there are questions about whether he's going to be a corner, whether they move him to safety, but with the playmaking that he showed at Iowa this past year, I think you at least try him out at cornerback. So I think with those 3 guys, they got, players who can start for them right away and who have the potential to be significant playmakers. But again, I'm so skeptical, they traded a 6th rounder for Adam Troutman. Come on.
Sean Payton's got to get his guys.
What are you doing?
It's his guy. They'll trade for Taysom Hill at some point when Russell Wilson stinks up the joint.
Yeah. So I'm just skeptical of this team in general, but I do like the pieces that they added this year in the draft.
Yeah, this is an incomplete. It doesn't look good now, but they are in position. If Russ is able to take a step forward again, and Sean Payton does instill a culture change. There's talent on defense, there's talent on offense, and there's some upside there as well. So tough division to play in, but this is kind of an incomplete because so much is going to depend on can Russell Wilson bounce back. And I agree, absolutely. I'm skeptical about that as well.
Yeah.
But that is going to do it for this episode with our AFC draft grades. Big shout as always to you, Matthew. Thanks for coming on. You can find Matthew Friedman, who is the director of content at Fantasy Pros, on Twitter at Matt F. The Oracle. You can find me at Chris Raybon, and be sure to check out our NFC episode, which is also out now. This has been the Action Network podcast presented by FanDuel. Until next time, let's get this shmoney.